Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. My name is Jo and I will be monitoring the chat and helping with any potential technical issues throughout. So today we will be focusing on achieving better data governance with 1Integrate, and your host will be Charlie Glynn, who I will hand over to shortly. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. So you've all been placed on mute. However, we do welcome your comments and questions. So please type these into the question panel. We'll address these at the end of today's webinar in the Q&A session. So if we don't get the chance to answer your questions, please don't worry. We will follow up with you afterwards. And finally, the recording from today's webinar will be available afterwards, and we'll share the link with you via email. So over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Jo, and welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be talking today about achieving better data governance with 1Integrate. So my name is Charlie Glynn and I am a product manager at Spatial. I look after the product 1Integrate. So I wanted to start by just saying that this webinar is part of a wider series of webinars that we've been running recently. We've already had an introduction to spatial data governance and management, and more recently, spatial data governance and management in practice. They are both currently available as on-demand webinars, so if you'd like to go back and catch up, they are available on the website at onespatial.com. As I say, this is the third in the series. So we've had the intro, we've had the look at and discussion around how that plays out in practice. So today we're drilling down even deeper into the type of tooling that we can use to enable better data governance and data management. And in this instance, we're going to be looking at 1Integrate. So the first few slides of this webinar, I'm going to talk about, kind of summarize those previous webinars, so just so we've got the context before we then have a deeper dive into the product itself. So kind of to start with, what is data governance and data management? So we have some definitions on the screen here. The previous two webinars, there was a lot of discussion around the Dharma wheel, which you can see on the right hand side here. This is the Dharma wheel from the Data Management Association. And here we can see we have data governance at the center of the wheel, and then lots of different activities around data management around the edge there. So when we talk about data management, this is often used as an umbrella term for all the 11 data functions, including that data governance. And data governance is all about setting the processes, the policies, and ensuring that we have the right people in the right roles making decisions about our data. So why is data governance important? Ultimately, we want to ensure that our data is fit for purpose. And when we say fit for purpose, that can mean different things to different organizations in different settings. So it's really kind of key to set out from the start what your own definition of fit for purpose is. And then with good data governance, we're ensuring that our data is compliant. We're ensuring that we have consistency across our kind of all our data assets, and really that we can identify and implement the relevant data standards. And again, just going back to the previous two webinars, there was lots of discussion in those around the importance of standards. I'm not going to go too much into that kind of detail today, but we have things like the OGC, ISO standards that we would kind of follow when it comes to managing and organizing and using our own spatial data. These things mean that the data is kind of interoperable, easy to integrate with other systems, and again, easy to share with other people, and ultimately that we're going to get the most value out of our data. Data governance ensures that we have the right people making the right decisions at the right time about our kind of key master data and reference data. And having this governance in place will ensure that you're ready for kind of change. So lots of big transformation projects happening across the board these days. And having this kind of the processes and the policies in place just ensure that as an organization, we're ready for that change and we can adapt more easily. And when it comes to data, change is inevitable. When it comes to location data, spatial data, even more so, as we know that spatial data has to change constantly to reflect the real world. So we want to be ready, as I say, ready to deal with that change. And data governance is often quite scary. It can be quite daunting if you're at the very start of a data management journey. To look at this wheel and all the 11 different kind of data disciplines, it can be quite a daunting task from the outset. But actually, it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to take a big bang approach. You don't have to try and tackle everything in one go. You can kind of start small and build over time. And I think hopefully that will come through in today's webinar, that 1Integrate is a really nice tool to help you take that kind of approach. It's nimble in the sense you can start small, you can start to assess the quality of your data and then build that out and grow that over time. And the product itself is going to scale as your needs scale up as well. So what are some of the challenges that you may face with your data kind of estate in your organization, especially if data governance is not in place? Well, as we just mentioned, data is constantly changing. As the world around us changes, as our organization changes, requirements change, you know, as a result, business upgrade your kind of systems and enter into new partnerships. So really, as I mentioned previously, having that process and policies in place is really going to help adapt to that changing landscape. A really kind of familiar one will be that data is held often in silos. So across different departments, in different databases, using different tools, you know, yeah, adhering to a variety of different standards. So there's often the need to bring that data together, integrate it, and that can be difficult if there's no good kind of data management policies in place beforehand. Data is collected over time by different people with different needs, so you end up with different levels of accuracy and consistency. And often what we'll find, and this is really important when it comes to spatial data, is unique referencing. And a lack of those unique references within data make things very difficult to really leverage the full potential of your data, especially when it comes to kind of integrating and merging and conflating data sets. Ultimately, a data set by itself is only, you know, so valuable, and we really start to benefit from it when we mix it and merge it with other data sets and other information. And that kind of golden thread, as it's often referred to, or the unique references within the data, really help make that so much easier. As I say, we can just start to leverage that value. Some data quality issues are particularly hard to spot. Some will be very obvious and you'll catch them, you know, just by eyeballing the data, but some are very difficult to find. So often we need, you know, tooling to be able to identify those that the human eye may miss. And then kind of manually managing data is obviously very expensive in terms of the time spent and the cost associated with that. And also, you know, if we're spending a lot of time just managing data, manipulating data, getting it right and ready before we can use it, that feels like a lot of time wasted, and time that we could automate. So that brings me on to the OneSpatial kind of core product capabilities. As I say at the top there, automation is key. So by automating our kind of data processes, our data management, our data quality checks, we can save that time, save that cost, and ultimately our people can be working on things that are adding ultimately more value. So ways in which the One Spatial products can help. We can help with that data governance and data management, those kind of overarching policies and frameworks. We can help with the data assurance and the quality. We can help validate the quality of your data, but then importantly ensure that that stays consistent over time. And we can also track kind of the trends of our quality over time as well. We can also cleanse the data. So if we find that there are issues within our data, we can automatically fix those up. Again, it can be a huge time saving. And beyond that, we can also enrich our data and enhance it. So that may be, as previously described, kind of conflating or merging multiple data sets together. Or it might be creating new data based on a set of rules, or indeed inferring new information based on the combination of kind of multiple data sets. And as the webinar progresses, I will give some examples of those. So ultimately, all of these endeavors, what we want is to have confidence in our data. We want to maintain quality data that we can trust. You know, as we more and more rely on our data for making kind of data-driven business decisions, we want to make sure we can have confidence in it. And that's what we do at One Spatial. We combine our technology and our expertise, and we enrich and enhance data for organizations, enabling that critical decision making and really ultimately helping improve the data governance, making sure that data is fit for purpose, as I say, whatever that might mean to a given organization, to a given project. We're making sure that the data is the right data to be used at the right time. So now I'm going to kind of move on to 1Integrate, and I'll start by just playing this 2-minute video. It does have a music track, so apologies if the sound doesn't come through. I'm not going to sing along to make up for it, but hopefully the music will come through. If you can't hear it, the video is also available on the One Spatial website. So I'm just going to play this video to introduce 1Integrate. So there we go, it's a nice little introduction to the product, and I will now go into more detail about some of the things that the video discussed. We will also have a couple of live demos. I'm feeling particularly brave this afternoon, so we are going to have some live demos as well. So 1Integrate is our no-code rules engine, and it really does help unlock the value of data for your enterprise at scale. So some of the main kind of pieces of functionality and the core capabilities are around that no-code interface. The fact that we can enable you to measure your data quality by running rules against your data. We can also help you fix and enhance your data, and we'll take a look at that as well. And it's all about knowledge management. So the rules really enable us to take that information, those business rules or technical rules that are often stored away in people's heads or locked away in spreadsheets or notepads, and really kind of encode that into the system so that they are repeatable and automatable. There's a REST API that sits at the kind of core of 1Integrate, so that gives us great integration points with other workflows and systems. Data connections, we'll take a look at kind of how we can connect with many different forms of data. And so the video also talked around the fact that you can take 1Integrate via the cloud, or it can be installed on premise. So we have really flexible kind of deployment options as well. It can deal with spatial data, non-spatial data, even 3D data, and combinations of kind of all of the above. We can integrate and bring that data all together. And it's all accessed via web browser. So it's a web UI, and we'll take a look at that shortly. So really, it's about validating our data, then correcting it where we need to, and also transforming it. So we do this by automating those processes. As I say, that means that these things are repeatable, but also traceable. So we'll have an audit trail of what happened, when it happened, what data was run through the process, what the results of that process were, etc., etc. We are encoding and sharing the knowledge around our kind of data processes. So once we have our rules, they can be shared, they can be adapted for other projects. As I say, once we've encoded them into the system, we can kind of store those as our own catalogs of our rules. We ensure that really you're targeting effort in the right places, and we take an evidence-based approach to that. And really, what I will show throughout the demos is how the tool itself enables effective collaboration across teams. I think that's really important when it comes to data management. That may not always be a centralized team that's managing data within an organization. The responsibilities may be spread out across multiple teams, maybe even people in different locations. But this web-based kind of interface really does enable effective collaboration across those teams. So the building blocks that enable these things within 1Integrate, we enable you to connect to your data from various sources, to read the data in, but also to save it back out. We can check your data, so we can check it for errors, issues. This is where the rules really come into play. And it is up to you to kind of create your own set of rules against your own policies, regulations, standards, things that you need to comply against, particular errors that you may want to be checking for within your data sets. And then, as I say, we can correct that data. So if we find errors or issues within your data, 1Integrate can also correct those automatically. We can then also create new or indeed missing data. So that might be something as simple as adding a missing value into a particular column, but it might also be generating a whole new object within our data set. And then, as I say, really importantly to all of this is that we don't just do it once, and it's not just a one-off process, it's fully repeatable. So we can repeat the processes as often and kind of, as and when we need. So that might be that you run a process once every evening. It might be that you run it once a week, once a month. It doesn't really matter, because we have that API kind of integration. We are in control of when and how our processes are run. And we're really excited actually because we've just launched a brand new major version of 1Integrate version 4. And this is a big release for us because we've put a lot of time and investment into the usability. So we did months and months of usability testing with our users, identifying common pain points, and then designing and developing this entirely new user interface. I think for anybody that's familiar with 1Integrate already, is going to be quite surprised by how different the new version looks. And anybody who's never seen it before, hopefully, you're going to see a really nice modern interface. So we've developed a kind of left-hand navigation flow, which is very similar to a lot of the tools we're familiar with on a kind of daily basis, like Microsoft Teams or Slack, or certainly email clients like Outlook. So it's really kind of familiar and easy to use and intuitive. And really it's going to enable kind of increased productivity, and it's making rule building easier than ever before. So this is a point where we're going to get brave, jump out of the PowerPoint deck, and we're going to have a look at 1Integrate, and I'll give you a tour of the new interface and just touch on some of the basic concepts from within the product. So what you're looking at here is 1Integrate. As I say, we have a left-hand navigation panel, and we have the concept of data stores. This is where we connect to our data and also where we can save data back. We have rules. This is where we create our rules that will be run against our data. And then we have things called actions. They look a lot like rules, but the difference with an action is an action is going to actually do something to our data. It's going to either report on it, or it's going to actually make a change to our data. We'll come back and talk about those in a bit more detail later. Then we have a concept called action maps. Action maps pair up a rule with an action. So if we find a feature in our data set that doesn't conform to the rule on the left-hand side, the action on the right-hand side will run against it. So this is when we talk about data corrections, data fix-ups. We will first identify the issues in the data set, and then we'll use the action to fix them. And we bring all of those things together in what we call a session. And a session within 1Integrate is what does all of the data processing. So here's a very simple session. I'm just going to select this one to show a little bit more about what we mean by bringing it all together and processing that data. So each of these rows here represents a task, and we can bring in various tasks into our 1Integrate sessions. I'll have a quick look here. So we can open data. We can open just the schema of that data. We can build topology, so we can start to connect up our networks, which gives us the ability to check and also correct things like features that might not join up and connect correctly. We can check rules. We run our rule against our data and get the outcome of that. We can apply those actions that we took a look at and also apply action maps. So that's where we're reporting on data, but also making fix-ups and corrections. We can do schema transformation. So it might be the case that we just want to move our existing data into a new kind of form and shape. So just change the schema of that data. We have the ability to do that here. We may just want to validate the schema of our data and check it against an existing schema and just get a nice green tick to say, yes, your schemas match, or otherwise we'll kind of flag any differences. We can pause our session at any time that we choose, and then at the end here we can also commit and copy data back out. So if we actually want to make changes to our data and then save those elsewhere, we can do that. We can also overwrite back to the same database equally. So if we look at this is a session that's already being run. We can see here at the top it's telling me that it was finished with a map. So you can see we've opened a couple of data sets here first of all. So we've got about 5,500 features that have been loaded in, and then each of these is a rule that we're checking against that data. We're actually checking the 8 building features that have been brought in. And some of these checks are checking that the new features sit nicely in amongst the existing kind of base map features as well. And then we get the results of our rules kind of immediately apparent on the right hand side here. So we can see that the conformance level for that was 87.5%. The next three here had 100% conformance, so none of our 8 new buildings kind of had any issues with them against those particular rules, and then again so on and so forth. So that's kind of the results at a glance, but we then get much more information and a kind of report coming out of each of those rules. So if I click on the results for this particular one, I'll see I get a summary that tells me that 8 features were processed and I have 5 non-conformances. If I then click show report, I'm drilling down even further, getting more and more information at every stage. This report will tell me when the rule was run, how long it took, how many objects were processed, what the conformance levels were, and then I get information about each individual feature that didn't conform to that rule. And I can then even start drilling down into that even further. I can also download the results of the report in JSON format, which I could use elsewhere. We also get a map so that we can view the outcome of our session on a map. So I'll just zoom in here. We can see the data that's been opened. The pink buildings here will show our new data. So these are the 8 buildings that we've brought in. If I just click on maybe that same rule that we were looking at, where we should have 5 non-conformances, we can see that they appear on the map. And what we can do then is, just like we looked at previously, we can kind of start to drill into each of those in turn, but this time we're doing that in a visual manner on the map itself. So we can cycle through each of those issues on our map. So they're the kind of main concepts within 1Integrate, as I say: data stores, rules, actions, action maps, and then ultimately bringing that all together within a session. We also have a dashboard for kind of admin users, so we can see what our grid kind of currently looks like, how many interfaces and engines we've got available, information about the environment that we're running. We can control our API keys from here, so we can add new ones, revoke when they're no longer needed. We can also manage access groups, which means that we can give certain users of the system access to the things that matter to them, but it's also going to protect those from other people being able to edit them. And then we can also do things like backup our repository, restore a new one, and things like that. And another neat feature that I'm a particular fan of is we also have a dark theme to the user interface as well. So we're giving the user the choice as to which of that light theme or dark theme that they use. Personally, my preference is always the dark theme. So I think for the next stage of the demo, I will leave it on the dark theme. But for now, I'm just going to hop back to the slides and talk a bit more about some of those kind of capabilities and the functionality within 1Integrate. So I want to talk a little bit about the rules-based approach. It may be new to some people, but yeah, rules engines are, as I say, kind of incredibly useful when we want to encode the knowledge that's stored elsewhere within our organization into a kind of central stored repository or catalog, so that then we can manage that easily. They become very easy to share as kind of resources, and we can adapt and edit them over time as well. So yeah, they become repeatable, traceable, easy to share, easy to reuse, and easy to configure and adapt as our needs and our data may change. So we're just going to have a look at the kind of makeup of one of our 1Integrate rules, how the logic is kind of laid out within the product itself. So here's an example where we want to check that all of our buildings have a function code of 1810. So that's kind of, you know, if you were to articulate that need, that requirement, That's how it would look within a sentence. And then this is how that kind of flows into 1Integrate and gets turned into a kind of rule. So we have our root node, which tells us which data set we're interested in. In this example, that is buildings. And then we want to check that the building F code value equals 1,810. And this is an example of a simple kind of geometric rule. So again, I want to check that no buildings overlap the curb lines in my data set. So for this rule, we're interested in curb lines, and we want to check that there are no buildings that overlap, that spatially overlap. So we're comparing the geometry of our buildings against the geometry of our curb lines. So what that looks like in the actual data itself is something like this. We may see a curb line on the map, and we'll have a couple of buildings. This one happens to fall wholly within our curb line, whereas this one sits entirely outside of our curb line. So this particular curb line feature would pass that rule. That would be a conformance. Whereas the example on the right-hand side, we can see very clearly that this building on the left overlaps our curb line, as does this building on the right-hand side. So because this curb line feature has two overlapping buildings, this would be flagged up by our rule as a non-conformance. So hopefully that starts to give you an idea how the rules work and how they are run against our data. Now, that is a very simple example. Rules can go from the very simple to very complex. This has just taken it up one notch in terms of complexity, because rules can cross-reference data layers. They don't just have to consider a single layer of data, and they can also consider attribution, geometries, or indeed a combination of both. So as we see here, we are cross-referencing our building features against our fire station features, and up here we're looking at geometries, but down here we're looking at attribute values. In this instance, it's the building value called type, and we want to check that the value of the attribute type equals fire station. As well as running the rules against our data, as we saw in the demonstration, we can also report the results of those rules, and we can report them really clearly, and it's totally up to the user to kind of decide exactly how they want to report that information. So you can really make sure that you're reporting like the most salient information to your teams, and this is absolutely ideal for that kind of automated data quality assessment that we spoke about earlier. So we saw what the task reports look like within the UI, but they can also be downloaded. That downloaded JSON file can then also feed your own kind of internal BI tools, so it can work and integrate with tools that you already have available to you. And really, this is all about that traceability. It's making sure that we can track what was run and when it was run, but equally that we can kind of track and manage the trends of the quality of our data over time. And hopefully, what we'll want to see is an uptick in that data quality. So if we sort of take this is a high level overview, but we took a look under the hood of 1Integrate, what would it look like? So we have the web UI in the center there, and as I say, all underpinned by the REST API. In the bottom left hand side, we see we have a repository. So this can be a database that you configure or stored on disk. Either the ones are options, but this is where we store all of our rules, all of our actions, all of our sessions, all of our data connections. So each of those individual entities that we looked at can be managed and stored in this kind of repository. They can be exported, they can be shared. This means it's really, really flexible as to how and when we use them. As we can see in the bottom right hand side, this is where data is we're connecting to our data sets and saving back out. Our data can be in various formats. It can be databases, it can be file-based data, or equally, we can pass data in from web services as well. And if we look at the top, what the kind of client interface might be for users of 1Integrate, we already took a brief look at the user interface. We also have a product called 1Data Gateway, which is really good for managing data supply chains. This gives a really, really simple kind of drag and drop intuitive interface on top of 1Integrate, which allows people to submit their data and run it through a 1Integrate session without having to really know or really care at that point what's happening. Just the fact they can drag and drop and run their data through, and they will receive a really nice report telling them how that data fared against the rules. And then equally, because we have the REST API, 1Integrate can kind of connect in with any other workflow or application. So that might be a kind of custom code, custom workflow. It might be a tool like FME Server, or any other, as I say, really any other application that can talk to a REST API. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of how it can integrate. So one is we integrate really nicely with kind of Esri products. We know that across the spatial geospatial industry, Esri is extremely popular, extremely well used products, and we have fantastic integration at kind of both ends of 1Integrate, so that we can talk to Esri software. That starts with bringing data in from some of those familiar data formats like the shapefile, geodatabase, even from the ArcGIS servers, to also connecting at the front end to things like the workflow manager, which can be used to kind of run those sessions as well. And the second example is FME from Safe Software. In a very similar way, we can bring data into 1Integrate by processing it through FME Flow, formerly FME Server, and equally kind of FME automations via FME Flow can also be used to kind of manage and control the running of sessions. So these are just two examples, but two popular kind of platforms, and also two very strong partnerships that we have here at One Spatial. So we have fantastic integration into these other common workflows. I mentioned it once or twice, but 1Integrate really is great for collaboration. As I say, that's particularly important to kind of teams that are managing large kind of data assets across an enterprise, as they may not be in an individual team. You may run the work in various projects, and kind of the fact that lots of people can kind of collaborate together on the creation of the rules, the connecting of the data, the creation of the actions, and also the running of the sessions. So I just want to run through some of the core kind of functionality that really enables that collaborative way of working. So the first one is the fact that we have a web-based no-code UI. So nobody needs to be a programmer or a specialist, particularly in order to get started. We have online documentation and training that really enable anybody to kind of upskill and get going very quickly. And as we already saw, all of our kind of entities, so our rules and our actions, etc., are managed in a very familiar and easy to use kind of folder and file structure. We also have lots of metadata throughout the interface, which tells us things like who created the particular entity and when it was last edited. We can leave inline comments. So the example on the screen here is a comment within a rule. We can leave comments and actions. We can put comments in our sessions. So much like developers do when they're writing their code, we can leave really helpful comments. We can also use that space to ask each other questions as well, or just remind our future selves of something that we wanted to remember later on. We can back up all of those entities and then restore them later on. And we have a synchronization tool, which means that just like code, our entities, our rules, and our actions can be version controlled and synchronized between 1Integrate and something like GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever version control. So as I say, we're really treating it just like we would the kind of code within our kind of own products. There are tools for kind of debugging your rules and actions, which can really help, whether you're doing that yourself or whether you're kind of pairing up with somebody, and you can kind of help each other fix any issues or errors within your rules and actions. There are tools within the product that enable that. We already had a look at the access groups. That's all about managing people's access so that they can really only access and edit the things that matter to them. And of course, all of this can be cloud hosted. So all you have to do is log on from a web browser. At this point, I'm just going to dive back into 1Integrate and just give a bit more of a demo. So if we come back to a data store, what we'll find at the top of every entity is that we can add a description and add a comment. And then in terms of that additional metadata, we can see who created it and when it was most recently updated. And we also get this nice little dialogue here, which tells us what other entities are making use of this particular data store. In this case, I can see immediately that there are 3 sessions that are making use of this particular data store. And each of these becomes like a hyperlink. So I don't have to go searching around where to find things. I can simply click on one of those and it will take me straight to that session. We mentioned comments. So if I right click and add a comment here, I can start to add comments into my session itself. And again, that can be a note or a question or just something to remember later on. And again, if we take a look at how that works within a rule, so we can just collapse this tree to give ourselves a bit more space in our rule builder. We can expand all of the nodes. And it may be that I'm developing this particular rule and I'm not sure what distance we should use. So I could right click here and add a comment to this particular node. And I could leave a comment for one of my colleagues. Is 400 the right distance to use here? And these things just become really useful for when we're working together. And then we saw earlier the kind of access groups and our ability to manage our API keys here. So we can really start to control permissions, control who can access what, to make sure that each of our team members are accessing the right things at the right times. So if we come back down here, we'll see this is where we have the action that we've just been looking at. So if I run this session, you'll see that it runs in a matter of seconds. We've processed nearly 10,000 features there. I can click on the timing session. This will tell me that took just under 3 seconds to run there. And what I'm doing in this particular session, I'm running a rule. I'm then running a fix-up action, and I'm then running the same rule again just to check the results of that action. And I can see that the first time we checked that rule, we had 3 features that didn't conform. Then we fixed them up, and by the end, I've fixed up 2 of those features, and I have 1 left that doesn't conform to that rule. So that's just a quick example of how that kind of fix up and the checking of that can work there. And in terms of the demo, just wanted to show one final thing, which was an action that's going to actually change some data. So the data set that we're looking at has 2D buildings, and this particular action is going to take the geometry from those buildings and give the geometry a new value. And the new value is going to be an extruded version of the existing geometry, and we're going to extrude by the value that's stored in our elevation or elev attribute. So from here, I can jump back to my session and I'll just run that through. So we're opening up some data for Philadelphia, and then we're running that action that's going to say, extrude these buildings up to make ultimately we're turning 2D data into 3D data. And I can go ahead and kind of view that on the map just to check that everyth's worked as expected. So if I zoom into this portion of my buildings, what I can do is kind of right click and tilt the map, and then we will see, sure enough, our data has been extruded and we've got our kind of nice 3D buildings there. And then if we want to, we can start to kind of edit the color of those buildings on our map. So that's just an example of a kind of an action within 1Integrate that's actually making a change, making an edit to our data. And hopefully you've seen how kind of easy that is to do there. Finally, I just wanted to mention, talked about the REST API. This really underpins all of the functionality within 1Integrate, and this is supported by really thorough kind of Swagger documentation, so that anybody that's kind of into this kind of thing, you'll see that the API itself is really thoroughly documented. I'll dive back into the slides now. Apologies. A slight issue in reloading that slide. I'll just give that a quick refresh. Only a few slides left.
Charlie, if we're having issues while that loads, I do have a couple of questions. If you want to jump to those while we try and figure out what's happening.
That'd be great, Joe.
Yep, excellent. All right, so first one, does 1Integrate support loading data from web services?
It does indeed, yeah. So I think I already mentioned on one of the slides there that we can read in data from the Esri services. So that's one example. We also have support for the OGC Web Feature Service standard, so the WFS standard, and we will kind of add more web service support as that's kind of required by our users. So yeah, the answer is yes. We can load data from databases, from files, and also, I guess, kind of increasingly, to be honest, from web services.
Okie dokie, that's great. Thank you. Second question, what is the performance like and how does it scale if you need to increase the amount of data you are processing?
That's a really good question. I think the performance is hopefully better than my PowerPoint at the moment. But no, really good question. So I think in terms of the performance, what we've seen there, we were only loading small amounts of data in the demo there, but we saw that it could take, just literally a couple of seconds. Obviously, there are lots of variables to that. Performance is going to be dependent on so many things in terms of the environment in which the product itself is being run, but also kind of, how much data, how many attributes on that data. You can do things like indexing of your attributes to help increase performance. But I think one thing I will touch on is the kind of scalability of the product. We've spoken quite a bit about kind of starting small and scaling up as your needs to kind of validate and enhance more data kind of it scales up. So we have things like dynamic engines is one good example, whereby the product itself will scale up with your needs. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question, Joe, and thankfully we are back up and running.
We're back. I have one more question and we can do that at the end then, if that's all right with you.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, seamless filler there. Apologies for those problems. So only a few slides left, as I say. First of all, I just wanted to touch on kind of who is currently using 1Integrate and what they're using it for. So this slide just has a few logos of some of our customers that are kind of realizing the value of some of their data by using 1Integrate. You'll see some government kind of organizations here, some transport, Google obviously at the top there. So a real variety of organizations. And what I would say is that it's supporting a real variety of use cases as well. So some of the use cases are very obviously spatial data, but some are absolutely not spatial data at all. Some are using things like CAD drawings to validate that they are accurate and consistent. And as I've just mentioned, actually, talking about the performance, some of the use cases for 1Integrate have the need to run the session, under, say, 1 second, 2 seconds, so that what they're doing there is running very small amounts of data, but very often. And then at the other end of that scale, and the ADV in the bottom right-hand side is a really good example of this. This is where we are creating cartographic generalization for large geographies of data at a time. And some of those processes can take up to, like 24 hours and sometimes beyond. So what I would say is that 1Integrate is supporting a really wide, vast array of use cases. I guess what they all share in common is that we're managing data and we're ensuring the kind of accuracy, consistency, and compliance of that data. So you can access the One Spatial platform on the cloud. I've spoken a lot today about 1Integrate, obviously. We also have One Data Gateway, which I did touch on briefly. This is that kind of very intuitive, very easy to use web portal, which is great for managing supply chains, for taking submission of data from various people, various places, and bringing it into a kind of common environment, but making sure that we have the gateway that's checking those rules and making sure that the data is indeed fit for purpose. So I just wanted to touch briefly on some of the benefits that the cloud gives us. So it's really enabling us to maximize usage. As a user, you can experiment and test quickly and actually be the first to try out some of our new features. And you can also benefit from accessing 1Integrate how and when you want to. And as I mentioned in answer to that second question, kind of the scalability, so we can auto scale as your needs change and as your business load, more data sets, more often, more teams using it, different projects using it, we can scale up or scale down as needed. And really importantly is that we minimize, we shorten the time to value, so that you can start using 1Integrate within minutes of kind of from interest to usage. And on that very point, I'd just like to say that you can, if you're interested in what you've seen and heard today, you can get your hands on 1Integrate for a 30-day free trial. So there's kind of no credit card required for this, no additional IT, no software, and we have training modules online that you can work through to kind of help get you started using the product. So as to say, if you're interested in what you've seen and heard, if you have an idea of a project or a data set that you would like to kind of test and trial, then please do go to onespatial.com/1Integrate, and there's a form on that page that you can fill in, and we can get you up and running in no time from your 30-day free trial. So really, that brings me to the end of the presentation itself. I'd just like to thank you all for tuning in. Apologies once again for the slight technical hiccup there. But if you have any questions for the team, as you can see, we are spread globally. And there's all our kind of contact details. Get in touch via email, phone, website, or indeed on social media. So that was it. Thank you very much. And I'll hand back to Joe. I think earlier you mentioned there was at least one more question come through.
Yes, there has been. So the last one that I've received is, I'm curious to know how many rules a typical project uses.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the answer to that really is that it depends. So we have lots of different examples. As I say, some have very differing requirements in terms of the amount of data and how often they want to kind of run and validate that data. So we do see a real range, I would say, is probably the answer to that. So some projects may have tens of rules, but we see some projects where there are actually thousands of rules. We take an example of like in the BIM space. So if we're validating our kind of 3D models, our digital twins, then the likelihood is that there's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance. So we may need hundreds or often kind of thousands of rules. But it depends on the requirements of the project. But hopefully, from what I've shown of 1Integrate, you know, we have the kind of folder structure, the files. So if you apply good naming conventions, then it's actually, even if it gets into the hundreds, they're really easy to manage because they can be, you know, stored in subfolders. You can store them in, you know, logical groupings and categories. And actually they can be, you know, exported and restored and shared and adapted and configured nice and easily. So yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. All right, that was really interesting, Charlie. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's enjoyed the session. As I mentioned earlier, the recording will be available and we'll be sharing that via email. If there are any other questions, obviously feel free to get in touch with us and we'll do our best and we'll come back to you as soon as we can with more information. All right. Thank you very much. Cheers, Charlie.
Thank you.
And cheers, everyone. Thank you. Bye.